Chapter 2. London, Lamethyst Club, 3 months previous. Neath Pilgrim was dreaming about her past. She was 10, and at her old school, that ancient pile that dominated the landscape for miles around and was whispered of by the locals. A place where the wretched gathered to learn penitence, and where she'd been unceremoniously dumped all those years ago. All Hallows had once been a sanatorium, and its change to a school for children whose parents had something better to do hadn't necessitated by the Board of Governors any investment for structural change. The heraldic inscription in All Hallows' Great Hall should have alerted her upon her arrival. "We will seek, we will find, we will conquer." It should have finished, she now knew, with, "or you'll be trodden underfoot." The dormitories, washrooms and common rooms had all remained the same. A lick of paint had been the largest outlay. The place reeked of scouring powder, and the pupils reeked of carbolic soap. The staff, apart from the vice-principal, all looked as if their contracts had been renewed from the previous institution and behaved very much as if they were incarcerated along with their charges. Pilgrim's sleep was fitful, as that part of her subconscious that she kept at bay crept out from hiding. Neath had felt the thwack to the back of her head by a wooden ruler, not for the first time that morning. Had she done something wrong? No, it was simple. Her teachers didn't like her. In their words, she was a troublemaker. She didn't try hard enough. She didn't apply herself. Worst of all, she cheated. How else to explain why she'd passed every exam and was top of the school, as she never paid attention in class, rarely handed in homework, and was never seen studying? They'd made her dip her fingers one by one in the inkwell, instructing her not to come back until all evidence of it had been scrubbed off. She'd scoured the stains from under her nails until they'd bled. Pilgrim was beginning to sweat in her sleep. The pounding of her heart should have awoken her, but she was in too deep. She'd been sucked down into a vortex of memories she kept suppressed. "Neath, Neath, you've got to wake up. Matron is going to put your name down if you're not bathed in 10 minutes. Now move!" Neath's head felt hot. She could barely stretch her body. Why did her limbs feel so heavy? She heard the tension in Sam's voice. She needed to get up. A bath. Yes, she felt she needed a bath. She should take a bath. If only she could lift her head. As hard as she tried, she couldn't. "Neath, hurry!" The insistence in Sam's voice was palpable. Yes, she had to hurry, but those didn't sound like Sam's footsteps. "I can't," she heard herself whisper. Her lips felt dry and cracked. "Sam, help me up." She could detect a shadowy figure approaching her slowly. Surely Sam was coming towards her, standing above her. Why wasn't he helping? Pilgrim involuntarily shrank back in her bed. It wasn't Sam. She instinctively felt afraid of the dark grey presence looming over her. The swish as the birch tore through the air was followed instantaneously by a loud crack as it hit her body. Pilgrim mercifully plunged herself back into the blackness. Neath found she was already bathed and standing alone in the darkened bathroom stalls adjoining her dormitory. She was rhythmically brushing her hair, gazing into the mirror with the slow, steady strokes of a person mesmerized by their own repetitive actions. With the bathroom in abject gloom, the only light came from a single wall-mounted sconce outside. Looking above her, she mentally acknowledged the bathroom light was off. She reached for the light switch. Neath, don't look." Sam's voice sounded terrified. His voice had become fainter, but no less desperate. There was another sound behind her, drawing her attention. The clear sound of a tap dripping into deep water. Distinctive, loud, hypnotic. Turning towards it, she moved back into the dark. Reaching the deserted stalls, her fingertips felt out, making contact with the stall door. She took a step forward, with her arm outstretched, opening the door inward. In the dimness, she saw a wink of light as it caught in the faint ripples fanning across the top of the black water. The bath was filled to the brim and ready to overflow. She stepped over and looked down. The drops from the tap were becoming slower as they fell to meet the water below. 1 drop slower. 2 drops slower still. She wanted to look up, but she was too frightened to raise her gaze. As the surface of the water began to still, she saw the reflection of a girl on the opposite side of the bath. It was a reflection of her, but with her hair wet and plastered to the sides of her face. Her features were grey and gaunt, with eyes staring impassively at her. She felt a surge of nausea and instinctively covered her mouth. The image on the other side remained motionless. Suddenly its eyes became wide with terror, its mouth gaped open, baring its teeth, about to scream. She watched helplessly as a web of fear entangled her sanity. She witnessed its scream turn to hysterical laughter. Despair descended, smothering her. Some part of her psyche, desperate to save her, forced her to cry. She had wept the tears of hopelessness and had fallen from life like a leaf in autumn, cast adrift and consumed by the indifference of others so many years before. Pilgrim felt an overwhelming heat consume her body. Her head was aching. She felt her body fall backward, falling, further and further into the blackness. Neath fell from blackness. Her frail and malnourished body hit the floor with a dull thud. Her eyes fluttered open, her eyelashes soaked by silent tears. Her body still curled about her only friend, Sam. His body had become stiff and cold, but she didn't care, as long as she could still breathe in the scent of him. It had been 4 hours since she'd found him. 1 look, and she'd known she was too late. With the gentlest care, she'd cut him down, catching his wasted body, and had gathered him to her. She hadn't taken the noose from his neck. She couldn't bear to see another mark on his translucent skin. She'd understood why he'd done it, and a part of her was happy for him. No one should have to stay if they could escape. She knew he'd waited around longer because of her, but now he'd left, and she was alone again. She removed the penknife she'd used to cut him down from her pocket and slowly and deliberately cut off a curl of his hair. Sitting cross-legged, she'd carefully plaited it with strands of her own from an inconspicuous place behind her left ear. She stood, wiped the streaked tears from her face, straightened her pinafore, took a deep breath, and walked away as Pilgrim. Pilgrim's virgin wrath as she'd walked All Hallows' main corridor had unfurled from devastation to overwhelming fury. The fire alarm had tripped as the first incendiary waves she emanated scorched an arc over her. She'd been deaf to the cries and screams as staff and children tripped over one another as they ran from the burning building. She'd moved from room to room, creating fireballs around her and systematically laying waste to everything in her path. All Hallows wasn't just a blaze, it had become an inferno. Pilgrim was lost somewhere, huddled in a corner of the depths of her mind, rocking in grief. The edge of her fury spent, she walked desolate through the flames. Bereft beyond reason, she made her way back to the basement, oblivious to the maelstrom of fire she passed through. Lying down on the ground, she gently curled up once more around Sam. Cradling his head in her arms, the flames burst around them, matching the intensity of her grief, flaring from burnt orange to incendiary blue and engulfing them. Pilgrim awoke with a start. She'd been crying, damn it. Ripping back the covers, she stood unsteadily and went to her bedroom window to open the curtains. It was early morning outside. The guilt over Sam's death still haunted her. She should have been there more for him. She wasn't okay, but she wouldn't indulge her thoughts on why she thrashed and sweated in between. Last night she'd felt more alone than ever. She had to stop this spiral. It wouldn't end well. She'd learned in the ensuing years what she was capable of, and in her sanity, it frightened her.